Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a little bit of a look at the continued complete history of the Pokemon trading card game. We have reached EX Delta Species today, and I know we've had a couple of weeks off. The deal very simply is, we will be here every Sunday with a new history video, unless there are lots of reveals that need to be covered, in which case we'll be there not too far afterwards. Do make sure you spam that like button, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me that these videos are appreciated so we can keep them going. Now, EX Delta Species is a very, very cool one for me, because I did actually do a top 5 kind of history video about this 4 years ago with the lovely Nick Pierce, although Nick is now Freya Pierce, and please use the appropriate pronouns she and her. Still a very lovely person. So EX Delta Species then, check the video out, there's a link in the description. Released in Japan on October the 28th, 2005. Released in English on October the 31st, 2005. A 3-day gap in release. But of course, we have pre-releases, whereas Japan don't. So we actually got the entire set before Japan. That is not something that usually happens. Now, the reason very simply is that this and Legend Maker got swapped around. There was a translation issue, so although we were supposed to get what would end up being Legend Maker first, we swapped the sets around and we ended up getting Delta Species. Now, this actually had just a little bit more of a story than most TCG sets had. It was all based around the Holon Research Tower, which incidentally was literally the set symbol, and can be seen on the Japanese pack art, but not the English pack art, which is kind of sad. And that tower was located in Mirage Forest, which was introduced in the previous set, except it wasn't because the previous set came out later, which is a little bit weird. But essentially, the Holon Tower was a home of scientists who conducted research on Mew and other strange new Pokemon, and according to the lovely folks at Bulbapedia, great website for research, essentially there was some electromagnetic radiation, and new species of Pokemon called Delta Species came around, with different typings. Now, the holo versions of these, a lot of them ended up, and some of the rares as well, did actually end, in fact, all of the rares and holos, ended up with a secondary typing of metal. Think about them as a counterpart to the dark Pokemon we'd seen previously. They didn't all come through like that. Dratini, for instance, came through as a lightning type, and Larvitar came through as a fire type. But all the kind of the evolved ones and the rares and holos, they did all come through with a dual type, one part of which was metal. So we got old Pokemon in new typings. This made it one of the most interesting and definitely one of the coolest sets we've ever had. We also had Pokemon that were energy cards, and they transformed the game. They were absolutely ridiculous. So we had Holon's Magnemite and Holon's Voltorb. They were your basic Pokemon ones, and they came through. I mean, Holon's Voltorb, you may attach this as an energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon. While it is attached, it is a special energy that provides one colourless energy, and then Magnemite was exactly the same. And what was really cool here, of course, was essentially a Pokemon that could give you an extra energy attachment. Yeah, it was only a colourless energy, but it was still, if you needed to retreat turn 1, if you just needed one more colourless energy, these had your back. But far better were Holon's Magnemite and Electrode. Now again, they had the same ability as each other, and you could attach it from your hand to a Pokemon that already had an energy card attached to it, and when you attached it, you returned an energy card from that Pokemon to your hand, and it then counted as a special energy that was any 2 energy. So essentially, if you already had an energy attached, you could swap it for this that counted as 2 energy. Now you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, Wassy. What is the point of swapping 1 energy for 2? Why don't you just attach a second energy? And it was for Pokemon like Blastoise and Meganium that could accelerate energy. You would attach a water energy using Blastoise as part of your turn, and then you would swap that water energy for a Holon's energy, which essentially meant that you were just attaching 2 energy. It was, well, it was frankly ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen, in how good it ended up being. These cards absolutely changed the game. And I know we should really be talking about these in our best cards, but these were weird in terms of being awesomely playable, but they were also interesting from a thematic standpoint. Also interesting as a thematic standpoint, we had 8 Ditto cards. We actually had 9 Ditto cards. We had regular Ditto, and then we had common versions of Ditto Charmander, Ditto Pikachu, and Ditto Squirtle, as well as Ditto Geodude. And then we had uncommon versions of Ditto Pikachu, Ditto Squirtle, and Ditto Charmander. No Geodude, but we added in a Ditto Mr. Mime and a Ditto Bulbasaur, which clearly makes 10 Ditto. Sorry about that. Don't tell anyone I teach maths. And we did actually see some of these popping up as convention promos. So Ditto Charmander came around as an Origins promo, Ditto Pikachu came around as a San Diego Comic-Con promo, and Ditto Squirtle did come around as a Games Expo promo. Now, what was very strange here is that there were only 3 Pokemon EX in the entire set, which does make it the least of any EX set. And we had Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. They were all phenomenal cards that saw a huge amount of play and really did shape the metagame. I mean, we might have only had 3 EXs, but there's a strong argument that this set still had the best set of EXs of any set. But we'll get to them in a moment. It is far from the last time we're going to talk about them. Now, we did also have 3 Pokemon stars as well. We had Kyogre and Groudon that make a good pair. And of course, if you're going to get the pair of those 2, how could we have them without also getting Metagross? And there was a secret rare box topper in the set. It was Azumarill, the only secret rare we actually saw in the set. But you know, Azumarill! Yay! The pre-release promo was Metang. Don't know why Metang, but it was Metang. And if we look at the most expensive cards, you really are looking at the gold stars. Now, it's really hard to get a proper price on these, but when I was looking around in prep for this video, Groudon was going for about $500, whereas Kyogre and Metagross were going for somewhere in the region of $300 to $500. Groudon did seem to be the most expensive. In terms of the EXs, it was Jolteon that was coming in at somewhere around $110, but good luck getting a good condition of that card at the moment. It's near impossible. And the Mewtwo, weirdly, was coming in about $40, so if you're looking for a non-star, non-EX, you're probably looking towards Mewtwo. Now, in terms of the theme decks here, we had 2. We had Breakthrough and Steeplechase. Now, Breakthrough's a weird one for me because obviously later on, many years down the line, we would actually get ourselves an expansion called Breakthrough. But this was a Grass Lightning deck focused around Crobat, and you got yourselves a Holo Crobat, a rare Weezing, and a rare Holon's Electrode. The other one was Steeplechase, a fire colorless deck. We've not had a set called Steeplechase. You can see the tower on the box art here, incidentally, which is very, very cool. But one thing I find extremely strange here, that our rares in the set were Salamence, Porygon 2, and Swellow. Salamence being a holo. What is super weird here is that the cover Pokemon is Rapidash, but Rapidash is just an uncommon. That doesn't happen. Usually the Pokemon on the front of the theme decks are what the theme decks are based around, and they tend to be holo rares, so that's very strange to me. It's very strange. Now, if we start looking at the best cards, we really need to look at the Holon engine. This did just literally transform the game. Even decks that did not use any other cards from Delta Species used the Holon engine and just ran. And it was all based around Holon Transceiver. Now, this was an item card, and this really did make the whole engine run. It let you either search your deck for a supporter card with Holon in its name, or your discard pile for a supporter card with Holon in its name, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Now this basically makes it Versus Seeker, and we've all seen how good Versus Seeker is. Except it's better than Versus Seeker because it also lets you search out a supporter card from your deck. So you could literally play like 1 or 2 copies of a supporter, but you would have 5 uses or 6 uses of it with Transceiver, and you would be able to search it out from your deck or discard pile. It gave you ridiculous consistency. So even if some of these supporter cards don't look quite as good as some of the others we've looked at in previous history videos, do remember that it still ends up being amazing purely by virtue of the extra consistency that you get. It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, to give you an example, the Empoleon, Swift Empoleon, that was printed as a Worlds deck, did very well in 2007, was a Diamond and Pearl Empoleon deck that used a Holon engine. That's a little bit weird. Now, if we have a quick look through all of the supporters here, we had Mentor. Now, all of these you had to discard a card from your hand in order to play. That was a standard thing. And you searched your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon with 100 HP or less and put them into your hand. Great for getting your basic Pokemon out. We had Scientist, that if you had fewer cards in your hand than your opponent, you drew to make up the difference. They've got 6 cards in hand, you've got 1. You draw 5 cards. We had Farmer, which was your recovery. You search your discard pile for 3 basic energy and any combination of 3 basic Pokemon or evolution cards. Basically 3 basic energy, 3 evolution cards. And you shuffle them into your deck. Note that in a lot of this artwork you can see the tower in the background as well. It was very much a themed set. Now, Last came along as well, and that let you count the total number of prize cards left for both players, and then you looked at that many cards on the top of your deck, and any energy cards you found, you put them into your hand. And it does say energy, not basic energy. Now, Researcher let you search your deck for a metal energy card or a basic Pokemon or evolution card that has Delta on its card, show it to your opponent, and put it into your hand. Now, bearing in mind, I told you that all of the rare and evolved Delta Pokemon were part metal. That's why you get a Delta Pokemon and a metal energy. It actually worked really nicely. We saw Adventurer. Now, this one was a little bit weird. You had to discard a card from your hand to draw 3 cards. They all made you discard a card. But if you discarded a Pokemon with Delta on its card, you would be able to draw 4 cards instead. So, not just a Holon engine here, but really giving you an advantage if you're playing lots of Delta Pokemon. And then we actually had 3 Holon energies. Now, these weren't part of the engine per se, but they were still very, very cool. The Fighting and Fire energy, if you also had a basic fire attached, you had no weakness. If you also had a basic fighting energy attached, you don't get affected by resistance. All of these gave you advantages for particular basic energy. The Grass Lightning one, if you've got a basic grass energy attached, you can't be affected by special conditions. If it's a basic lightning energy attached, then damage done by your opponent's Pokemon EX is reduced by 10. I should mention that none of these work on EXs, they are non-EX cards only. And then Water Psychic, if you've got a water energy attached, you prevent all attacks other than damage done by attacks. And if you've also got a Psychic energy attached, your retreat cost becomes 0. So there are lots of different advantages you can gain here by playing these particular energies, and we did see them popping up in all kinds of decks. Now, outside of that, there weren't really any non-Holon trainers that we liked in this set, but there were a bunch of Pokemon that ended up being really, really good. Gardevoir, for instance. Now, Gardevoir came along with a really nice ability, and what it based, or Pokepower as they were back then, once during your turn, you may move an energy card attached to one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon, to let you move your energy around. You also, for 2 energy, could do 10 damage for each damage counter on Gardevoir to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Or for free energy, you did 10 damage, plus 20 more for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so punish them for having a large bench. This was largely used to support the Gardevoir EX Delta, the fire one, with the awesome Poke Power Imprison, which said that once during your turn, if Gardevoir is your active Pokemon, you may put an Imprison marker on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and any Pokemon that has an Imprison marker on it can't use any Poke Powers or Poke Bodies. Yeah, that was a little bit dumb good. So the Gardevoir was very, very nice. Crobat was another really, really nice card from this particular set. It had the attack Radar Jam, which did 30 damage and stopped trainer cards. And then target attack for a grass, a metal, and a colorless. You chose one of your opponent's Pokemon and did 40 damage to it. If they already had damage on, you did 60 damage instead. And this was generally what you would want to do here, is sit there using this attack over and over again, just to take out all of your opponent's bench Pokemon. You'd play it with the Dark Crobat from Team Rocket Returns, that had a Pokemon power that poisoned them if it was in the active, and the Azumarill from Team Rocket Returns, which had the Poke Power Froth, whereby when you evolved it, you paralyzed the defending Pokemon. And then you would use stuff like Mr. Briny's Compassion to reuse that ability over and over again. So the active was paralyzed and poisoned and you'd be taking out the bench. And Marowak did see a little bit of play here and there. It wasn't the best card ever, but we did see it popping up a little bit. It was nice to cover against fighting weak Pokemon. And what we saw from Marowak here was 2 energy. Choose a number of your opponent's Pokemon up to the amount of energy attached to Marowak. Do 20 damage to each of them. So that wasn't for hitting fighting weakness, that was just for being a nice efficient spread attacker. And then free energy, 50 damage, but if the defending Pokemon is a metal, you do 90 instead, bearing in mind that the good Delta Pokemon were all part metal type. So you had a nice bit of spreading, and you had a bit of type coverage there as well. Now, Mewtwo was a very, very nice Pokemon at the time, and it was largely for the Poke Power Delta switch. Once during your turn, when you put Mewtwo from your hand onto your bench, you may move any number of basic energy cards attached to your Pokemon to your other Pokemon, other than Mewtwo, in any way that you like. It was Shaymin before Shaymin came out, and Shaymin was awesome. Also had an attack that did 10 damage for each energy attached to Mewtwo and the defending Pokemon, but remember, Delta Switch couldn't be used onto Mewtwo. Now, a particular favourite of mine, of course, Porygon 2, love me some Porygon, and it had the Poke Power backup. Once during your turn, if you have fewer than 6 cards in your hand, you may draw until you've got 6 cards in your hand. It was just a really nice draw engine, although it did unfortunately fall foul of Battle Frontier, which said that colourless evolved Pokemon can't use Poke Powers. Boo! Battle Frontier came a bit before this, but did end up hurting this as well, which makes me a little bit sad. Now, Dragonite and Metagross were very, very good cards, and these very much did make a deck in and of themselves, and it was one of the very best decks in the game when it came out. Dragonite had the Poke Power Delta Charge. Once during your turn, you may attach a Lightning Energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. And that was largely what you used Dragonite for. It was largely for accelerating energy. Although an attack that did 30 damage and gave it immunity on a coin flip, not too bad at all. We then see Metagross coming in here. And Metagross has got the Poke Power Delta Control, which had Crush and Burn. Discard as many energy cards as you like attached to any of your Pokemon in play, and you do 30 damage base plus 20 more for each energy card discarded, which is a little bit dumb. Another Pokemon that you can see the tower really nicely on the artwork. I'm not pointing all of them out, but I do think it is worth pointing out just how redonkulous it is that we've got just wonderful artwork with the tower in, and how themed it is, which really does make me happy. I wish more of these sets were themed. It did also have a really nice Poke Power Delta Control that let you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, put 1 in your hand, and the other 3 on the bottom of your deck in any order. It was really nice for consistency. So yay! And then we get to the Eevees, and the Eevees really were the stars of the set. The Eevees were amazing. So Flareon was a very nice one. Now these all had Poké Powers, whereby when you played it from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you got to do something. In this case, Flareon, when you played it, both burned and confused. Why would that be a good thing? Because of the Ariados from Unseen Forces, which for one colourless energy did 10 damage base, plus 30 more for each special condition on the defending Pokemon. So if you evolved into Flareon, there's 2 special conditions, and oh look, now you're doing 70 damage for a single energy, which is kind of redonk, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen. Kind of redonk. Vaporeon came along. Again, these were all very good cards. With the ability, or the Poké Power, Evolutionary Swirl, when you played it from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may have your opponent shuffle his or her hand into his or her deck, and then draw 4 cards. And we've seen this more recently on Pokemon like Marshadow. But essentially what you do here is just disrupt your opponent. You give them a new hand of 4 cards, just to really slow them down. And when Rocket's admin went away, and we didn't have such good options for disruption, this became even better. And then we saw Jolteon here, who, like I've said, has become the most expensive of them. When you play Jolteon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. And then for 2 energy, 20 damage plus 10 for each damage counter on the defending Pokemon was not exactly terrible. So spreading damage around without needing to attack, pretty gosh darn good. And these really were at the centre of so many decks. For instance, Absol Eevees. Now this was a deck that basically won everything, including the World Championships in 2007, piloted by Tom Roos. And essentially, you would have your Jolteon for spreading energy, your Vaporeon, and you would have your Jolteon for spreading a bunch of damage. And the main attacker in these decks tended to be Absol EX. Now, when you played it from your hand to your bench, you got to move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another, setting up KOs nicely. And for 2 energy, you did 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that already had damage counters on. Bearing in mind, if you've evolved into Jolteon EX, they will all have damage counters on. Worth pointing out, we also play Jolteon Star here, which when you play it from your hand to your bench puts 1 damage counter on each active Pokemon, yours and your opponent's. Also played with the Delta Rayquaza, which wouldn't come out for a couple sets yet. But it basically ignored all colourless energy in the attacks if you were behind on prizes. And then it was 1 or 2 energy, 30 damage to a Pokemon, or 50 if they have a Poké Power or Pokébody, 2 or 4 energy, 70 damage. Every time I cube with my friends, this is always one of the first cards I go for. This is a card that has won me many, many cube games. But make no mistake about it, Eeveelutions with Absol was just the best deck. It won US Nationals, it won the World Championships, I think it won UK Nats, it just won everything. It was frankly ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen. But that wasn't the only place we saw the Eevees coming around. Now, Flareon specifically was part of this Flariados deck I told you before, which was just basically Flareon and then Ariados, and you'd roll from there. Now, Espeon EX was actually a pretty good part of this deck. Espeon, when you evolved it, you got to choose 1 evolved Pokemon on your opponent's bench, and remove the highest stage evolution card from it. The theory being, of course, that they've then got a lower HP Pokemon, which will be easier to actually go about and KO. And yes, obviously this did see play in all of these other EV decks as well, especially when you're spreading damage. It just becomes a little bit ridiculously good. We saw a deck just literally called Eeveelutions, which ended up doing very, very well at the previous World Championships in 2006, which didn't play Absol, it just played all of the Eevees. And of course you would have type coverage, weak to fire, bring out Flareon, weak to lightning, bring out Jolteon, etc. This deck would also play Umbreon, as well as the other ones we've mentioned so far. And Umbreon, when you evolved it, you got to switch one of your opponent's bench with their active, which of course is really nice for taking out the Pokemon that you want. Also, single energy, 20 damage, and your opponent cannot retreat or use Poké Powers on the defending Pokemon next turn. You can't tell me that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And this really was just let's take advantage of all of these abilities or Poké Powers while also making sure we can hit type coverage against anything. Of course, we did see weird things like Blastoise, Lugia, Steelix, LBS, or Lugia, Blastoise, Steelix, I suppose, which ended up becoming really good because of the Holon engine. By this stage, we already had Blastoise to accelerate energy, and we already had Steelix and Lugia as our main attackers. But as mentioned earlier, we could now use Holon's Electrode and Holon's Magneton, and what you would essentially do is attach one energy with Blastoise and then swap it for the double energy, which basically, it meant you could actually be attacking with cards like Lugia and Steelix really quickly, when they're supposed to be really big, powerful Pokemon that take a while to get rolling. That was also an absolute powerhouse of a deck. And then, of course, the other one we need to mention is one we kind of already have, Meta Knight, your Dragonite Metagross deck. Back in the days where we would just mash names of the Pokemon together, that made me very happy. And this really was Dragonite to accelerate energy and Metagross to turn around and smash. Though we did also play a Metagross from Deoxys, because it had the Poké Power Super Connectivity, which let you search your discard pile for a Psychic or Metal Energy and attach it to your active Pokemon at the cost of taking a damage counter. And of course, you're already playing the Metagross line anyway, so it really literally could have just been a one-card deck, which, that helped quite a lot, quite frankly. This deck also tended to play Rayquaza Star, it's worth pointing out. Rayquaza Star, 2 energy, flip a coin till you flip tails, 30 for each heads. But also 4 energy, 100 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX, which is, quite frankly, ridiculous. And because of the Holon Pokemon, you didn't even need to play Fire Energy in the deck, which is, kinda dumb, ladies and gentlemen. Kinda dumb. Delta Species is going to go down as one of the weirdest and coolest sets we ever saw. The fact that it brought in these alternate type Pokemon, the fact that it brought in all of these really good evolution Eevees, and just such a good set. Plus it was properly themed and it had its own location, and this makes me very happy indeed. And I think that's basically everything you need to know about it. But I'd like to know what you think now. I'd like to know your memories of Delta Species, and if you don't have any memories because you weren't playing back then, I would like to know your impressions having seen them now. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.